The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Magic and Skepticism. Hey, so I'm getting ready to start my second leg of the Magic and Skepticism World Tour, and I mostly finished the Canadian leg. There are a lot of questions that came in. I wanted to answer some of those, talk a little bit about what this entire effort is, and why I think there's value in it, and why it's important to me. First question that came in is, what exactly is this? Is Magic and Skepticism with Matt Dillahunty, is this a lecture on skepticism? Is this a magic show? Is it some sort of mix? And the answer is yes, it's some sort of mix. I got my first magic kit when I was about 3. I probably got serious about magic around the age of 10 or so. It is something I'm kind of passionate about and obsessive about, as much or probably a little more than religion and philosophy. But I found myself giving lectures where I was trying to teach the basics of skepticism. And it kept popping up in my mind that not only is there a strong connection in the history between magic and skepticism, but also there are magic tricks that are really good at demonstrating principles of skepticism to people. And so I spent, I did a couple of smaller lectures with smaller tricks, more close-up stuff, but I wanted to broaden this to be an actual stage show lecture. And so that's what I'm doing. Now, the next question is there going to be video of this? Can we watch this, somewhere? And the answer to that is probably not. I don't tend to post recordings of me doing magic. You'll find a few of them out there. There were a couple tricks that I did for Skepticon that were specifically put together so that the video of that could go up. There's a number of tricks that I end up doing in the show that other magicians rely on. I'm not a big fan of here's a video of this show, because then people can just sit there and rewind it. The people who want to figure it out can figure it out, but what ends up happening sometimes is that they'll ruin it for others, and if I don't do a particularly good job, I don't want to ruin somebody else's show. But the core of the show is, what is skepticism? Why do we care about it? And how do you do it? And so I thought I'd go through some of those, as well as talk about some of the things that have happened on the tour, the great interactions I've had with people. And then as we continue the tour across the US, the UK, and perhaps even further so that it becomes a proper world tour, maybe I'll run into some of you out there. At a minimum, we'll get some of the high points of the skepticism portion of that tour out in this video. And you can kind of look at it as a primer on skepticism. Skepticism 101. So when I was in Vancouver, in preparation for doing the show that evening, we had already done Victoria, we did Vancouver, Ottawa, Winnipeg. In Toronto, it was a discussion with Jordan Peterson, which is also relevant to skepticism. And there's a video about that, but I'll mention a couple things here. But I was in the hotel getting ready to head down to be picked up to go to the show. And I'm carrying my jacket for the show and the boots and some props and stuff. And there were 2 women standing outside of the elevator on my floor. And they'd, of course, already pushed the button. They were waiting for the elevator to arrive. And it enters my head sometimes that, these sorts of coincidences in life, once upon a time, I would have tried to claim that this was a sign from God or a universal karma or something like that. It was just really nice that I didn't have to push the button for the elevator for myself. Somebody else had gotten there first, and the elevator arrived exactly as I approached the door, which was awesome. And I got in the elevator and I was commenting to the women who were there, and I said, this is great. You guys have amazing timing. I should put you in the show, and then everything will work. And so they asked about the show, and I told them what it was. And they said, so what are you doing, though? I mean, are you like teaching skepticism? And I was like, yeah. And one of the women looked at me and said, don't you think the world is skeptical enough already? And I kind of knew where we were going, but I said, no, I absolutely don't think the world is skeptical enough. And they looked at me and they said, well, in our field, it certainly is. Our field is loaded with skepticism. And I said, what field is that? And they said, nutritional supplements. And it was all I could do to keep from face palming right there in the elevator, but it definitely affirmed, in my head at least, the need to run around and do these sorts of lectures a little bit more. Because that's an area where, when they say there's plenty of skepticism in our industry, what they mean is we are constantly running into skeptics who are asking us to demonstrate the truth of the claims we make, and it's really frustrating. And that's exactly the way it should be. So it's not that they have some appreciation for skepticism. They are irritated that they have to stand up and provide evidence for their claims in the face of skeptics. That is exactly the way it should be. And so when I go through and do the show, I'll skip the magic portions of this, but we start with that kind of anecdote and a discussion about what skepticism is. And much like the t-shirt that I had printed and wore for years, I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. The basics of what skepticism is an attempt to make sure that what I think in my head, the internal model of reality in my head, matches the reality I experience as best as possible. That I have a good understanding, that I believe true things and that I don't believe false things. Because when those ideas live in your head and the thought processes that led you to accept bad ideas live in your head, you're going to have more bad ideas. And the problem is, what's it feel like to be wrong? Well, it feels exactly the same as being right. If you don't know you're wrong, you think you're right. So you could be wrong, and you probably are, and I probably am wrong about all kinds of things all the time, and yet we think we're right. So the goal is to figure out whether or not we have good reason to be right, to proportion our confidence level in those beliefs to the evidence that's available, to kind of train our guts to be better at making the sort of intuitions and inferences that lead us through our daily life. When somebody posts a meme on Facebook that says, California wants to ban the Bible, and you immediately share it because you're convinced it's true, that tells us a lot more about you and your biases than it does about anything California is actually doing. And so there's this process of how do we do skepticism? And that's the investigative process where you ask questions and you question everything. But what skepticism is about reserving your belief until you have good reason for it. It is not cynicism. It is not running around saying, oh, this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true. Oh my gosh, how can you believe this stuff? You're so stupid. Because the truth is, all of us have false beliefs. None of us are perfect thinkers. And we are all going to make mistakes. We're all going to share something on Facebook that's from, if you share anything, you're going to end up sharing something that's not true. We're all going to be convinced of something that's going to turn out to not be true. And probably the biggest values that you can use when trying to apply skepticism in your life is, number one, don't be so dang confident. Recognize that, hey, I believe this and I think I have good reason, but all of my positions should be tentative and subject to new evidence. I should be willing to revise things as I get new information. That doesn't mean you have to sit there and spin your wheels forever and ever wondering if, the earth is flat. You can reach conclusions, and now the bar by which someone would need to demonstrate that you're wrong is increased. Because our brains go through a process when we hear new information, and it's not a rigid structure, but essentially it comes down to, do I already believe this? Yes or no? Ah, cool. Yes, then I don't have to evaluate further. Although maybe you should. And then after that, it's, what do I know about the person that's giving me this information? Do they have some ulterior motive, to perhaps con me out of something? And I go through some tricks that you might find from con men. I don't have a magic trick that actually goes through like the Nigerian scam stuff, but I think that might actually be valuable. But after I talk a little bit about what skepticism is, what the value is, the fact that feeling right and wrong, you can't really tell the difference. And I also point out that being willing to say, I don't know, but let's go find out, leads us to the methods. In science, the scientific methods, there isn't really a method. It's kind of a bit of misinformation when people talk about the scientific method. But what we know is that science is the single most consistently reliable method for giving us information that is accurate about reality. Science doesn't make proclamations about truth. Science and scientists shouldn't ever be saying, this is true and, unchanging. It should always be, this is the best explanation given the information we have that explains and creates the model that explains the world we live in. Why do we care about it? Well, because being wrong has consequences. And I don't talk about religion much in the show, although I do start off with a bit of audio from Ray Comfort that accompanies a trick. But recognizing those consequences of being wrong are what make you want to be right. And I think almost everybody intuitively cares about the truth. They care about reality. If you're getting ready to cross a street and you don't see a bus coming, how do you know that you're not just hallucinating that the street is clear? These are things we care about. You're going to wind up dead or injured or if you don't have an accurate model of reality. That is the nuts and bolts of what skepticism is. And then there's a number of tricks that I've inserted to kind of emphasize specific points. And I'll touch on a couple of those before we're done. So in addition to being more comfortable with saying, I don't know, something that I think we've, as a society, made a mistake in. How many times were children called up to the blackboard or asked to give an answer to a question in class, and they didn't know the answer, and of course they get mocked or laughed at, rather than acknowledging that when somebody says, I don't know, that's very likely the accurate answer for them, and may in fact be the accurate answer for everybody. Why is there something rather than nothing? The big philosophical questions, there are people who think they have answers to, but how do we go about determining whether or not those answers are actually correct? So getting more comfortable with I don't know, and in discouraging people from mocking those who would say I don't know, is one key. Another that's demonstrated from another trick is not being so confident about your own understanding and your own perspective. If you are so confident in your view of things that it causes you to dismiss somebody else's view without any sort of evaluation, that's not skepticism, that's cynicism. That is, hey, that's nonsense, that's garbage. And so being open to having your mind changed is a good thing. It can be problematic. How many times are we going to test dowsers? I do a whole bit on dowsing in there where we talk about when I was a kid, they'd give me a fork stick and you put it in your hands and you go walk around the field and the stick would dip down and that's where the water is. And at once upon a time, when we were a more agrarian society, figuring out where to dig your well on your property was important. But what a lot of people don't realize is that when that stick dips, there may be water there may not be. If there's water anywhere on your property, it may in fact be everywhere on your property. So the real question is not where's the water, but where's the easiest access to the water? And just because a dowser happens to find water once you drill your well, that doesn't mean they found the best access. What you really need is something more like ground penetrating radar, which they didn't have access to. And now that we have a better understanding of that sort of technology and other technologies, you don't really see dowsers dowsing for water. Curiously though, they claim they could douse for other things, and gold, and yet every single time that they've been tested properly with proper test conditions, double blind, here we go, we're gonna do this, we're gonna see how many times you can consistently predict where whatever you're dowsing for is. They've never demonstrated that they can do what they claim they can do. Most of these things where people attribute a sort of paranormal ability, they are accurate at about the rate of chance, which means you're just as good flipping a coin, which means essentially we've demonstrated no effect there. And then the question becomes, how many times have we debunked dowsing? Well, skepticism isn't about debunking, even though that's kind of the view that Houdini gave it when he was running around debunking spirit mediums. Certainly, if someone is a fraud and you have the ability to demonstrate that they are a fraud, you can do that. But you haven't demonstrated, even if you find a fraudulent dowser who's trying to cheat, you've shown that they're a fraud, but you haven't said anything at all about whether or not dowsing works. And if you test 500 dowsers and nobody can produce the effect that they claim, have you now debunked it? Are we done? Do we ever have to address this again? You haven't debunked it. All you've proved is that those people on those days, in those ways, weren't able to produce the effect. Having said that, it's reasonable to say we need something else, not just another person coming in with the same claim over and over again. And this is why the James Randi Educational Foundation $1 Million Prize changed some of the model about how they go about the $1 Million Prize testing. And that included, you have to have some write-up in a newspaper and things like that, so that we didn't have to spend time testing everybody who had convinced themselves that they had an ability. You had to actually convince somebody else. I also talk about Project Alpha in the show, which was James Randi getting two young mentalists to go in and fool the scientists in order to make a point that since magicians are the experts in fooling people and scientists aren't, that it might be wise to get magicians involved if you suspect that there's trickery, and it might be wise even if you don't suspect, because whether or not you suspect trickery doesn't tell you whether or not trickery is actually going on. I cover a number of other things in the show. There's a bit of magic and a bit of fun, but I want to talk about interacting with the people, both the volunteers that come up on stage and who I get to meet afterwards, because this has been the real kind of litmus test of this project for me. So there are a number of other points that I make throughout the show, and the show is evolving as I, rework things and find better ways to do stuff. There's one trick that's been pulled out of the show and replaced with something else, and it addresses a different aspect of skepticism. And I'm going to be working in ideas about making sure we're asking the right questions. My favorite example for that is, if somebody calls into the show and says, well, if God didn't create the universe, who did? And that question, of course, already presupposes that the answer is a who rather than a what. And the better question is, what is the explanation for the origin of the universe? Because that question allows you to answer with any answer. It could be a God, could be some natural process, we don't know. So make sure that you're asking the right questions. But in the process of running around doing this, and we did shows across Canada, I'll start in Halifax, but then do across the United States in, we stopped Boston, but I think it's Jacksonville, Chicago, Denver, Phoenix, Los Angeles. Los Angeles is actually an event with me and Cara Santa Maria and Seth Andrews, so it's not this show. But my favorite part is interacting with the people in these communities. For the bulk of the last 14, 15 years, I've donated all my free time and everything else to running around speaking with local groups and at big conventions. But the local groups are incredibly important because creating the sort of landing places for people who find their way out of religion, where they can interact with like-minded people, where they are comfortable saying what they think and talking with other people, that's important. And so if you go to the website, mattdillahunty.com, and you find that your city is one of the ones that we're coming to, go ahead and reach out and in the course of the Q&A section, which follows at the end of the show. So it's about an hour or so of Magic and Skepticism lecture, and then there's about 40 minutes or so of Q&A depending on the venue, and then I do a quick meet and greet afterwards. But I like to announce local skeptical, local secular organizations, so that somebody who was familiar with my work and came out to the show but didn't know that there were already 2 or 3 groups in their area now have somebody that they can talk to about those groups, so that we build bigger and better communities. I could stay home, not travel as much, and produce videos and go out to just do the big events. But I wanted to do this tour not just because I love magic and not just because I love talking, which is definitely true, but also because we are at the point in the broader secular community where we've grown, and people are occasionally worried about, oh my gosh, is there mission drift, or has there been division, or what's the secular community doing to make the world a better place? And the truth is, a lot. Not only do you have organizations like Atheist helping the homeless and Humanists at Work, but you have meeting and gathering places like Sunday Assembly and Oasis. And people aren't always familiar about these. Sometimes it's difficult to get the advertisement out there. The atheist community of Austin started with an ad in a newspaper. Just, hey, let's get some like-minded people together and we'll meet up at the local coffee shop. And it grew into the Atheist Experience TV show, the Nonprofits podcast, the Godless Bitches podcast, and now Talk Heathen. And there's a community of people here who interact and do things sometimes several times a week. It's a good community. Is it perfect? No. Is it for everybody? No. But there are Sunday Assembly, Oasis, all these sorts of things that people can participate in, and the movement has grown to the point where now you have options. It's not just, I'm going to go down to the bar with the same, 5 old weirded white guys to talk about how silly religion is, and we're going to mock, this or that. Now there's broader diversity, both in who is there, but about what we're doing. And I've spent years on the Atheist Experience show. I'm going to continue doing debates and teaching about debates, primarily on religious topics. That's where my expertise is. But I'm an atheist because I'm a skeptic, and as a skeptic, I can't believe something unless there's good evidence for it, and there isn't good evidence for religions. I'm a humanist, and I want to make sure that as I run around, I'm advocating for skepticism and humanism primarily, despite the fact that I'm open and out and supportive of using the atheist label and identifying as an atheist. I've already done a video, you get to use whatever label you want. But in the process of doing these events, I hope to get more people involved in their local communities so they can have more events and work together to make their communities better and create better landing places for people who find their way out of religion or who have felt alone, or even lifelong atheists who think, I'm the only atheist in this town. I'm in this tiny little town 100 miles outside of here, and I'm the only one. The odds are you're not. And there are many different ways to bring people together, and I'm hoping that the Magic and Skepticism Tour continues to be one where we bring people together, have a little bit of fun, learn some stuff, and help encourage people to recognize the value of skepticism. And then when I finish this tour, I might just do a morality and magic tour if it makes sense. And if it doesn't, we'll yank the magic part of it, because as much as I love doing it, and will do it for all my life, it really makes sense when talking about skepticism to both entertain and educate. And the feedback has been amazingly positive. And I was really happy to meet people throughout Canada who told me stories of how the work we've done has impacted their lives and how appreciative they are. And I'm incredibly appreciative for everybody who comes out and shares an evening of fun entertainment and education. And you can bring your friends, by the way. I don't want to make this just, oh, Matt's just doing an advertisement for Magic and Skepticism, because one of the earliest questions I got is, I have friends that would benefit from skepticism and would enjoy a magic show, but they're still religious. How much time in the show do you spend talking about religion and talking about debates? And the truth is, in the show itself, there's virtually nothing. There's one little kind of side comment, but it's fair to the point where all of my Christian friends would agree with me, or most of them anyway. But I can't tell you what's going to happen in the Q&A, because that's what you bring. And the Q&A portions are one of my favorite parts, and I think what brings a lot of people out. But if you think somebody's going to be turned off by a discussion that challenges what they think about their religion or their politics or anything else, it might be the case that after hearing a lecture about skepticism, about questioning answers, about not reaching conclusions, and where it's clearly explained that, I'm not concluding that you're wrong, I'm just not convinced that you're right, and establishing where the burden of proof might be. I think that fewer of them are bothered by those topics coming up in question and answers. It's in a way we sort of primed this as, hey, we're just good people who aren't convinced of something. And I think that can go a long way too. So I hope to see you out at the events if I come to a town near you. And if your community wants an announcement from stage and wants to get involved, by all means, you can email me or you can contact Pangburn Philosophy, and we'll do what we can to work it out. See you next time. Bye-bye. This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.